The silence was the worst part. It was 4 in the morning, and the desert air outside Bakersfield was cold and thin. Inside the office of the Iron Horse Grill, the fluorescent light above the cheap laminate desk hummed a lonely note. The assistant, a nervous kid named Mike who usually managed Frank Donovan's vast digital archives, decades of film history, contracts, and unspoken deals, was wiping sweat from his forehead with the cuff of his linen shirt. He hadn't slept in 36 hours. Frank, the man they called the boss, or simply the director, sat across from him. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even raising his voice. That was the terrifying thing. The quiet intensity of a man who had faced down charging elephants, corrupt studio executives, and enemy fire, and found them all equally dull. The director was 65 years old, but he carried the lean, coiled power of a timber wolf. He wore the same old denim shirt he'd worn filming his last 4 projects, faded perfectly at the elbows. "So, Mike," Frank said, his voice a low gravel, like a shovel scraping concrete. "Tell me again. Slow. No hyperbole." Mike swallowed hard. His phone, lying face down on the desk, was vibrating every 30 seconds, a digital barrage of chaos spilling in from the outside world. "Sir, it started simple. The video was posted around 9 p.m. West Coast time. A shaky cell phone clip, maybe 40 seconds long, titled, 'Old Man Gets Roasted by Hogs Over Parking Spot.'" Frank didn't move. He just stared past Mike, past the desk, into the accumulated weight of the past few hours. He was seeing the parking lot again, the smell of exhaust and cheap leather. Mike continued, tracing the disaster with a trembling finger on the desk surface. "It shows the confrontation, sir. You and the leader of that local chapter, Spike. The kid looks 22, maybe 25, full of fire, no fuel." Frank finally shifted, leaning back into the hard wooden chair. It creaked in protest. "And the spot?" Frank asked. The question was not about the space itself. It was about respect, about the line drawn in the sand. "It was the spot, sir. The one with the faded yellow paint. Number 1. Frank nodded once. That parking spot, right by the kitchen entrance, had been informally reserved for him for 20 years. A quiet gesture of gratitude from the restaurant owner, Sam, who Frank had bailed out of trouble back in the early 90s. It wasn't a celebrity spot. It was a trust spot. Mike leaned closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, even though they were alone in the dead quiet building. "Sir, they filmed the whole thing. Spike thought he was making a tough guy video for his followers. He had no idea the phone was still recording when he walked away, swearing and laughing, and then, sir," then he looked back, right into the truck. Frank's eyes, the famous eyes that could pierce armor and read a man's soul, narrowed slightly. "And what did he see, Mike?" The phone vibrated again, a desperate, silent scream. "He saw you, sir. Not the icon, not the legend, just the old man in the cab of that beat-up Ford F-250. And that's when the smile went completely flat. That's when Spike realized he hadn't just stolen a parking spot. He had committed grand theft disrespect, and the whole world was about to watch him pay the toll. To understand the arrogance of Spike and the stillness of Frank Donovan, you needed to rewind the clock, not just a few hours to the parking lot, but decades. You needed to understand the difference between noise and impact. The weight of Donovan. Frank Donovan was a man built from the dusty, uncompromising soil of the American West. His legend wasn't manufactured by social media algorithms. It was forged in the fire of genuine commitment. He was the last of the Mohicans, a director who still shot on film, a man who answered emails only if they contained death threats or good news about cattle prices. His father had been a rancher, a taciturn man who believed that silence carried more weight than any speech. Frank learned early that volume was inversely proportional to power. He carried the scars of his life like invisible medals. There was the psychological shrapnel from his first failed marriage, the financial near ruin of his independent film studio in the 80s, and most profoundly the memory of the sweltering heat of Southeast Asia where he served 2 tours before Hollywood even knew his name. He didn't talk about the war, ever. But sometimes, in the pre-dawn quiet of his sprawling ranch, he would catch the scent of gunpowder and monsoon rain, and the past would be vivid. He learned patience there. He learned to differentiate between true danger and mere aggravation. A loud engine was aggravation. A tripwire was danger. He drove the Ford F-250 because it started every morning, smelled faintly of diesel and leather, and had no screen distracting him from the road. It was anonymous, reliable, and strong, just like him. Lately, the world felt different to Frank. It was louder, more brittle. Every celebrity sought to be relatable, and every minor incident was filmed for maximum outrage. Frank saw the tension rising across the country, a generational schism built on the idea that history was disposable and reputation was simply a factor of follower count. Frank saw the entitled ignorance everywhere. He didn't judge it. He simply observed it, the way a seasoned rancher observes a drought that is already killing the grass. The hollow roar of Spike. Then there was Spike. His real name was Kevin Jenkins, and he hailed from a suburb 40 miles outside the city, not some gritty urban core. Spike was anxiety wrapped in cheap leather. He wasn't a career criminal. He was an IT support specialist who spent his weekends transforming into Spike, the fearless leader of the Desert Dogs, a tiny probationary chapter of a national biker organization. Spike needed the organization like a junkie needs a fix. It gave him instant prefabricated identity. Spike's swagger wasn't earned through tough choices. It was purchased online, tailored, and deployed on Instagram. His bike, a throaty, chrome-heavy beast, was financed at 19% interest. The noise it made was intentional, designed to mask the quiet voice in his head that told him he was deeply average. Spike's history with Frank Donovan was non-existent, but his historical contempt for the old guard was rampant. He often posted rants on obscure forums about boomers hoarding the good life and Hollywood elite who looked down on the working man. Frank Donovan, the silent icon, represented everything Spike resented: inherited power, quiet confidence, and a legacy that didn't need amplification. Spike had spent the afternoon arguing with his mother about rent and then receiving a humiliating email from his boss. He needed a win. He needed a confrontation to prove his worth to the 5 patched members of the Desert Dogs riding behind him. The night air was charged with this specific brand of modern misplaced aggression. Spike was hunting for validation. Frank Donovan was just looking for a decent steak and some quiet time away from the studio drama. They were orbiting each other, 2 timelines about to collide in a spectacular internet-breaking wreck. The Iron Horse Grill sat on the edge of the freeway, a beacon of greasy comfort in a world of chain restaurants. It was famous for its 32 Oz T-bone and its commitment to never renovating. The parking lot asphalt was cracked, and the paint lines were mostly advisory. It was 7:45 p.m. The last sliver of the Mojave sun was bleeding orange and purple into the sky. Frank pulled the F-250 slowly through the lot. He knew the routine. He wasn't looking for attention. He didn't park the truck. He placed it. He guided the heavy vehicle toward the single spot reserved for him. Spot number 1. He parked precisely between the lines, the engine ticking quietly as it cooled. Frank pulled a faded baseball cap low over his eyes and reached for his old leather jacket draped across the passenger seat. Before he could open the door, he heard it, the growing roar of multiple engines, a sonic assault that rattled the truck's heavy frame. 5 bikes, all chrome, black leather, and noise pollution, peeled into the lot, ignoring the speed bumps with synchronized disdain. They were loud. They smelled of engine oil, cheap cologne, and the distinct odor of manufactured danger. Spike led the pack. He looked like a caricature of aggression: squared shoulders, a patchy beard, and a helmet tucked under his arm, revealing a face flushed with purpose. They rolled right past spot number 1, paused, and then reversed. Spike pointed dramatically at the spot Frank's truck occupied. One of the other bikers, a giant named Tank, gestured toward the ample empty space at the back of the lot. Spike shook his head vehemently. "That spot!" Spike yelled, his voice cutting through the remaining engine rumble. "The premium real estate. We take that one. Tonight we own the front." They didn't park next to the truck. They parked around it. 2 bikes went nose to tail, effectively blocking Frank's exit. Spike deliberately angled his massive Harley across the front fender of the F-250, his back wheel a few inches from the aging chrome bumper. It wasn't just parking. It was a blockade. It was a statement. Frank watched all of this from the silent cockpit of the truck. He didn't sigh. He simply exhaled slowly, the way a marksman steadies his breathing before a critical shot. He opened the heavy door, the sound a dull thunk in the sudden quiet. Spike turned immediately, anticipating the conflict. He straightened his shoulders, pulling his leather vest tighter. Frank looked at the bike blocking his exit, then back at Spike. "Nice bike," Frank said, his voice level. No emotion. "Just a simple observation." Spike smirked. "Yeah? You like it, old-timer?" Get too close, you might scratch your paint on my investment. Frank didn't engage. He just locked his truck, the electronic chirp seeming strangely apologetic. He walked past Spike, maintaining eye contact but not challenging. We need this spot, man, Spike called out, his voice now laced with accusation. We're regulars here. You got a lot of nerve taking the best one with that rust bucket. Frank stopped, his hand on the handle of the restaurant door. He glanced back, not at Spike, but at the bike blocking the truck. Have a good night, Frank said, and walked inside. The silence that followed was broken by Spike's loud, aggressive laugh. See, boys? Pushed him right out of the conversation. Another old fossil who knows when to shut up. A young waitress named Chloe, smoking a cigarette near the kitchen entrance, saw the whole exchange. She stubbed out her smoke, her eyes wide with alarm. She knew who Frank Donovan was. She knew this was not going to end well. Inside, the Iron Horse grill smelled of sizzling fat, industrial cleaning fluid, and the faint memory of generations of tough decisions made over lukewarm coffee. Frank chose a corner booth, always the same one. The light was dim, the shadows long, and the vantage point allowed him to see the entire room without being directly observed. The hostess, Maria, slid the menu across the red vinyl table. The usual, Mr. Donovan. Please, Maria. Black coffee first, and the steak, rare. Needs to bleed tonight. He settled in. He didn't look at his phone. He just watched the door. He was waiting, not for dinner. He was waiting for the arrogance outside to come inside. 10 minutes later, the door swung open with a rush of cool air and engine noise. Spike and his crew stomped in. They were loud, self-important, and they demanded the largest table in the center of the room. They stripped off their leather vests, revealing T-shirts with offensive slogans. Spike saw Frank immediately. He swaggered toward the corner booth. He wasn't looking for a polite greeting. He was looking for dominance. He stopped right next to Frank's table, leaning over the partition. Frank was stirring his black coffee. The spoon clinked against the ceramic, a tiny, precise sound. Hey, old man, Spike said, his voice too loud for the dining room. Heads turned. Just wanted to confirm you saw the bikes. Just checking you know where you stand. Frank lifted his eyes slowly. He didn't flinch. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly tired. I see the bikes, Frank confirmed. His voice was low. Good, because you're parked in our space, but we're going to let you slide tonight. Think of it as a lesson in generosity. Spike paused, expecting gratitude or apology. Frank took a slow sip of coffee. The silence stretched, thick and painful. No, Frank said finally, setting the mug down. Spike blinked. No what? You didn't let me slide, Frank corrected him. You blocked my truck. You demonstrated poor judgment and worse manners. Spike recoiled, surprised by the directness. He hadn't expected a pushback. He expected timid retreat. Listen, Grandpa, Spike began, his voice losing its forced swagger, turning genuinely venomous. We run this town on the weekends. You think you're special because you drove in here with a rusty rental? We earned our space. We paid our dues. Frank looked away from Spike, toward the nervous energy radiating from the other bikers at the large table. Dues, Frank repeated, the word tasting like ash. You think a down payment on a motorcycle and a chapter patch equals dues? The waitress, Chloe, brought Frank's steak. It was massive, seared black on the outside, blood red within. She set it down carefully, afraid to breathe. Frank looked back at Spike. Sit down, kid, Frank advised quietly. I'm about to eat. Spike couldn't retreat now, not in front of his crew, not after filming the opening salvo in the parking lot. The crowd in the restaurant was watching. This was his moment of proving. I don't sit down when I'm talking to a thief, Spike spat out. Move your truck by the time we leave or we move it for you. You understand, old man? You got about 40 minutes before we teach you a real lesson in respect. Frank picked up his steak knife. It was heavy, silver and razor sharp. He didn't hold it defensively. He held it professionally, like a tool for work. Respect, Frank mused, cutting a precise slice of the rare meat. That's a powerful word, kid. You keep using it, but you don't know what it means. He chewed slowly, savoring the flavor. Spike felt his blood pressure rising. The old man was eating steak while being verbally threatened. It was a calculated insult. I know exactly what it means, Spike snarled. It means you bow down to who's bigger and faster. And right now, that's us. Frank put down his knife and fork, resting his elbows on the red vinyl table. He looked directly into Spike's eyes, searching, testing. Bigger and faster, Frank echoed. He wasn't mocking. He was analyzing. I've seen bigger. and I've seen faster. They all ended up the same way, forgotten. He paused, leaning forward just slightly. The air got thick. The background chatter in the restaurant faded into a white noise of anxiety. "Let me tell you about the parking spot, Spike," Frank began, his voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless carried throughout the room. 2 decades ago, this place was struggling. Sam, the owner, was getting squeezed by some truly ugly people. Not guys playing dress-up on expensive bikes. "Real men who break knees for fun," Spike scoffed. "What, you gonna tell me you saved the place, Grandpa? You look like you need saving." Frank ignored the interruption. His narrative momentum was building, slow and inexorable. "Sam came to me, desperate. He needed money. He needed muscle. I gave him the money, Spike. I wrote a check, covered his debts, and signed the loans. But he didn't need muscle from me. He needed reputation. He needed them to know he was backed by someone they couldn't touch." Frank picked up a napkin and slowly wiped the corner of his mouth. They stopped coming. Sam survived. That spot, Spike. Spot number 1. That was his way of saying thank you. It's not reserved for Clint Eastwood, the celebrity. It's reserved for Frank Donovan, the guy who paid the toll and kept his mouth shut about it for 20 years. Spike's swagger faltered. His eyes flickered to the other bikers. They were suddenly very interested in the ceiling tile patterns. The story had landed, not like an accusation, but like a fact. "Now," Frank continued, his voice hardening, becoming less philosophical and more operational. "You want to talk about dues? I paid mine in the dirt, kid. I paid mine with compound interest on promises kept. You paid yours to the bank." Frank stood up. He was taller than Spike realized, maybe 6'1", but the posture made him appear 7 feet high. The power dynamic had inverted so sharply the room felt tilted. "You called my truck a rust bucket," Frank said, walking around the booth. He was closing the distance. "The truck is anonymous, but it's not mine." Spike frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Frank was now standing toe-to-toe with the younger man. The biker smelled his age. Cedar, leather, and quiet, unshakable capability. "The truck belongs to a friend of mine," Frank explained. "A Marine Corps veteran who lost both legs in Fallujah. He uses it to haul feed on his adaptive farm. He keeps it running. I borrow it occasionally when I need to blend in and remember what real life looks like." He leaned in, his gaze intense. "You didn't block my vehicle, Spike. You blocked a wounded veteran's mobility. You did it on camera. You did it for applause." Spike's face went from aggressive red to a horrified white. He finally saw the cost of his arrogance. This wasn't a celebrity feud. This was a war crime of social etiquette. Frank pointed toward the table where the desert dogs were sitting, frozen with fear. "Now here's how we're going to proceed. You and your friends are going to go outside. You're going to move those shiny toys of yours. Then you're going to wait 5 minutes. After that, you're going to come back inside, and you're going to apologize to Maria, to Chloe, and to every patron you scared tonight." Spike tried to rally. "Or what? You gonna fight me, old man?" Frank smiled, a cold, humorless flash of teeth. "I don't fight children, Spike. I finish things. I know the owner of your national organization. I know the police chief in 3 counties. And more importantly, kid, I know how the internet works. You came here looking for virality. I'm giving it to you. But it won't be the video you planned." Frank looked past him. "Chloe," he called out. The waitress jumped. "Yes, Mr. Donovan?" "Call Sam. Tell him to pull the security tapes from the lot, and tell him to give them to Mike, immediately." The weight of Frank's command crushed the air out of Spike's lungs. Security tapes. Surveillance. This wasn't a bar brawl. It was evidence collection for a man who understood media strategy better than Spike understood his own motorcycle. Spike turned and walked out. He didn't run, but every step was heavy with dread. The other bikers scrambled up, throwing their vests back on and following their leader, their silence heavier than any engine roar. Frank sat back down, picked up his knife and fork, and resumed eating his steak. It was still rare. The video didn't just go viral, it went supernova. Mike, Frank's assistant, had the full high-resolution footage from the Iron Horse Grill's security camera. It showed the entire scene, the aggressive blocking, Frank's calm exit, and then the final, terrifying confrontation inside the restaurant. Crucially, the audio was crystal clear. Mike cut the video strategically. It opened with Spike gloating about the prime real estate. It climaxed with Frank's devastating dues monologue. It closed on the shot of Spike staggering back, utterly defeated, followed by the image of Frank Donovan calmly eating his dinner. The title Mike used was simple, powerful, and tailored for maximum impact. Old man refuses to back down. Legendary director puts entitled biker gang on, blast over parking spot for wounded vet. The media cyclone. Within 48 hours, the story was the defining culture war moment of the week. Mainstream headlines. Fox News. The Last Cowboy, Frank Donovan takes a stand for traditional respect. CNN. Parking lot politics. Generational divide erupts over celebrity privilege and biker culture. Variety. Donovan's most shocking scene, yet, the unscripted reality showdown that broke the internet. The social media landscape. The carnage. Spike's small world evaporated. Twitter, X, trends. Donovan dues. Spike toll, F-250 justice. Real Vegas review. Just saw the Donovan video. Spike and his crew thought they were starring in Sons of Anarchy. Turns out they were just the first 10 minutes of a Frank Donovan movie, the part where the antagonist proves he's too stupid to live. Film Geek 77. Frank Donovan proving that true power isn't about flexing. It's about knowing who you are and knowing the receipt is always paid. That dues speech should be taught in film school. Perfection. YouTube comment section. Under the original video. User. Truth Hurts 209. This is classic. Spike thought he was intimidating an old man. He was trying to intimidate a force of nature. When Donovan mentioned the disabled veteran, oh man, game over. I hope Spike learned humility that night. 8.7K likes. User, Harley Rider TX. As a 30-year club member, I gotta say, Spike is an embarrassment. No respect, no intelligence. That truck represented a man who earned it. Spike needs to turn in his patch, immediately. The panic in Spike's camp. The backlash was not just online, it was real, professional, and devastating. Spike's National Biker Organization immediately disavowed the Desert Dogs chapter. They issued a formal press release, drafted by their terrified national president, apologizing profusely to Frank Donovan, the Iron Horse Grill, and the unnamed veteran whose truck was involved. Spike was formally expelled from the club. His patched members either followed him into organizational oblivion or quickly burned their vests and went into hiding. His boss at the IT firm, who had seen the video, fired him within 72 hours, citing public conduct detrimental to the company's image. Spike lost his job, his club, and his entire projected identity, all over a parking spot. Mike, the assistant, tracked Spike's frantic attempt to clean up the mess. Spike posted a rambling, tearful video apology, claiming he was misunderstood and having a bad day. It only fueled the fire. The internet viewed his weakness as confirmation of Frank Donovan's strength. Frank's quiet response. Frank Donovan remained silent. He didn't engage in interviews. He didn't issue statements demanding retribution. He simply went back to work on his ranch, letting the narrative play out on its own terms. 5 days after the incident, his public relations office released a single, elegant statement. It was 3 sentences long. Mr. Donovan wishes the young man involved in the incident well in his future endeavors. He hopes this serves as a valuable lesson in the difference between being loud and being impactful. The veteran whose truck was blocked received flowers and a gift card for a year's worth of diesel fuel from the Iron Horse Grill. No further comment will be provided. The minimal response was the ultimate power move. It showed he was already past the incident. He was dealing with real matters, while Spike was still trapped in the viral cage he had constructed for himself. Months later, the parking spot at the Iron Horse Grill, spot number 1, had become a minor landmark. People drove past just to photograph the faded yellow lines. The restaurant owner, Sam, eventually painted a subtle, beautiful mural on the wall next to the spot, the outline of a heavy Ford F-250 and a pair of hands shaking over a folded dollar bill, representing the quiet contract between old friends. Spike was last seen working as a delivery driver, using a small, fuel-efficient sedan. The bike was gone. His leather vest was likely gathering dust in a garage sale bin. He was Kevin Jenkins again, indistinguishable from the crowd, stripped of the identity he had desperately tried to steal. The incident was never about the space. It was about the echo. It was about what happens when manufactured bravado challenges quiet, earned history. Frank Donovan knew that the world was full of noise, full of people desperate to prove their relevance through volume and visual aggression. But noise is ephemeral. Impact lasts. Spike had spent his youth accumulating the symbols of toughness, the bike, the leather, the attitude. Frank Donovan had simply accumulated proof of commitment, proof of loyalty, proof of true strength, which requires zero external amplification. The young generation often forgets that the greatest power isn't in what you display, but in what you choose to conceal. Frank concealed his wealth, his influence, and his capacity for retaliation until the moment he needed them. And when he revealed them, the consequences were absolute. He wasn't an action hero on a screen that night. He was something far more rare and dangerous. A principled man who knew the value of his own quiet reputation. He understood that respect is a currency you earn in private and spend in public, usually only when absolutely necessary. The world watched a brief, 40-second clip and learned a timeless lesson. Never mistake the quiet man for the weak one. Never confuse volume with weight. And never ever assume you know the entire story behind the truck parked in the reserved spot. Because sometimes that truck is carrying the legacy of giants, and the simple fact that the man inside has already won the battles you haven't even learned how to fight. The world needs more people like this. Share if you agree.